Somebody asked me today about, isn't it a problem to have a white Jesus? What he said was, isn't white Jesus proof that Christianity cares more about cultural comfort than truth? He said the same goes for an Asian Jesus or an African Jesus. He just mentions a white Jesus because he's an American and he sees white Jesus everywhere. He says the issue should be a simple fix because we should understand that Jesus wasn't white, and if he walks into a church and sees a white Jesus nailed to a cross or in pictures, that should raise flags in our culture. So here's my response to that. Yeah, there are good reasons that the Bible tells us that images of God are not a good idea. It's because any images of God that we make reduces God and misrepresents him. Whenever we portray God in a way that is less than what he is, then that just denigrates God, and the Bible tells us not to make images of God. But I'll tell you this, that sometimes Jesus is portrayed as white by white people because people want to identify with Jesus. It's the same with the Asian Jesus or African Jesus. It's not because of any racism or necessarily cultural comfort, but because people like to identify with Jesus. But let's be frank about it. Jesus was not white. The genealogy of Jesus makes it clear that he was from the Middle East, with ancestors who were Mesopotamian. That would be Abraham and others. Some of his ancestors were Canaanite, which would be Rahab, and Moabite, which would be Ruth. It's also possible, though we don't know, that Jesus has some genetic connection with Africans, since Solomon had many wives, and we don't know the heritage of all of them. There's also a possibility of interracial marriages in Jesus' lineage. And so essentially, Jesus was of mixed Near Eastern heritage. There's every reason to believe he had normal skin tones for people from that part of the world, which, depending on his exact lineage, could be medium brown to dark brown. There's every reason to believe Jesus had dark brown eyes, not blue eyes, that he had dark brown hair, or even close to black colored hair. He probably had a beard, being a lawful Jew, and he most likely had peyot, which are the part of being an Orthodox Jew. He was probably of average height for a man of that era, which was possibly around 5 feet or a little taller. That was likely his height, and obviously we don't know anything about his weight. But there's nothing about his appearance that would have been considered unusual or striking. We learn that from the prophecy of Isaiah 53, and from the way people treated him. As far as we can tell, he looked much like anyone else in that era and in that culture. But usually Jesus is portrayed as a certain race because people want to feel a sense of connection with him. It's not racist as much as it is yearning to see Jesus as someone like me. See, skin color has nothing to do with it, or shouldn't have anything to do with it. We identify with Jesus because of the nobility of his heart, his compassion and the way he treated people, and the wisdom of his responses to people. You'll notice that everyone pretty much wants a piece of Jesus. Hindus consider him an avatar. Buddhists consider him enlightened. Muslims consider him a prominent prophet. Many people regard him as an admirable teacher, and that's why we portray him the way we do, because we want to see ourselves in Jesus, and we want to see Jesus in ourselves. He suffered nobly, he was filled with wisdom, and he treated people with compassion. So just so you know, and we're perfectly clear, Jesus was not a white supremacist. People who worship Jesus are not racist, and those who see or portray Jesus as their race are not being racist. Instead, we all see Jesus as an admirable person with whom we'd like to be identified.